12 words ended the debate. Not a war, not a summit, not a decade of diplomacy. 12 words spoken calmly, quietly, directly into the camera after 31 minutes of evidence so airtight that the most powerful government on earth had no answer. And what happened in the 3 hours that followed those 12 words revealed something the world will not forget. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will understand exactly why allies are now quietly rethinking everything, why rivals are drawing up new strategic calculations, and why one sentence from a Canadian Prime Minister may have permanently shifted how global power is read. If this kind of analysis matters to you, hit subscribe right now, because we cover this story every single day, and the fallout is still growing. Mark Carney walked onto that stage at a G7 economic forum alone. No notes, no teleprompter, no support team feeding him lines through an earpiece. Just a man, a lectern, and 37 minutes of preparation so thorough it became a weapon. Behind him, a screen filled with charts. In front of him, a global audience. And what he delivered was not an attack. It was not a political speech packed with charged language designed to provoke. It was something far more dangerous than that. It was a systematic, sourced, and surgically precise presentation of facts that made poor governance impossible to hide. And here is the part that should stop you cold. Every single number he cited, every chart he displayed, every figure he used to dismantle 2 years of American trade claims came not from Canadian sources, not from opposition researchers, not from friendly analysts, but from American government agencies. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Commerce Department, the Federal Reserve, the Congressional Budget Office. He did not call anyone a liar. He simply stood beside America's own numbers and let them speak. If you have not shared this video yet, do it now, because what comes next explains why 3 hours after this speech ended, the White House was in open, public collapse. The United States had claimed tariffs were reviving American manufacturing. Carney showed Bureau of Labor Statistics data confirming that manufacturing jobs in tariff-protected industries had actually fallen by 3.7% since those tariffs took effect. The United States had claimed the trade deficit with Canada was shrinking. Carney showed Commerce Department figures proving it had grown by 11%. The United States had claimed American consumers were not bearing the cost of tariffs. Carney showed Federal Reserve research demonstrating that 92% of tariff costs had been passed directly to American buyers through higher prices. 3 claims, 3 refutations, all sourced from Washington's own institutions. Then he moved to a direct economic comparison, and this is where the room shifted. In 6 of the last 8 quarters, Canadian GDP growth had outpaced American GDP growth. Canadian unemployment had fallen, while American unemployment in manufacturing regions had climbed. Canada's Trade Diversification Index had risen 31%. Canada's credit ratings had been confirmed or upgraded by all 3 major agencies. America's outlook had been downgraded to negative by 2 of the 3. He placed every figure side by side in clean, professional graphics. No drama, no editorial commentary, just 2 economies measured against each other in plain sight on live television. But the most quietly devastating part of the speech had not arrived yet. That part was still coming, and when it did, it would trigger something no White House communications team could contain. After the statistics and after the comparisons, Carney outlined Canada's forward plan: formal trade agreements with the European Union, the United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, Australia, India, and 6 additional bilateral partners, each with signed frameworks, defined timelines, specific financial commitments, and measurable execution targets. Infrastructure investment plans with construction schedules and verified funding sources. Supply chain restructuring programs with named corporate partners and launch dates already set. A 36-month economic roadmap with quarterly benchmarks. A document so detailed that a senior European trade official later said it was more comprehensive than anything received from any G7 nation in the past decade, including their own governments. This was not a vision. This was not a campaign promise. This was a functioning, financed, active plan presented openly on live international television so that every government, every market, and every citizen watching could verify it themselves. And hovering over every slide, never spoken aloud, was the question already forming in every viewer's mind. Where is the American version? Where is the American 36-month roadmap? Where are the formal agreements, the financed programs, the quarterly targets that could be set alongside this and measured? The answer to that question did not need to be spoken either. The empty space beside Carney's presentation gave the only reply available. There was no American version. There were tariffs, there were press releases, there were claims, but there was no plan, no document, no structure that could survive the comparison. And then at minute 31, Carney stopped. He closed the notes he had never once consulted. He placed both hands flat on the lectern. He looked directly into the camera, not at the audience, not at the diplomats in the front row, not at the journalist to his left, but straight into the lens, as if addressing one specific person. And he said 12 words without raising his voice, without smiling, without any rhetorical decoration at all. I have shown you our plan in detail. Now where is yours? He held eye contact with the camera for 4 full seconds of complete silence. Then he said simply, "Thank you," and walked off the stage. The question stayed. And 11 minutes later, the unraveling began. The first response came through social media. Just watched Carney's low-energy speech. Low viewership. Nobody cares what Canada thinks. A dismissal. Clean enough as a tactic if it had ended there. It did not end there. Over the next 90 minutes, 19 posts followed. And reading them in sequence is like watching a real-time record of a mind losing its composure in public. By post 4, the administration was challenging specific figures from the speech and getting them wrong, citing numbers that international journalists immediately checked against the same American government sources Carney had used and found to be inaccurate. By post 8, the tone had shifted from dismissal to hostility. Personal attacks on Carney, threats of additional tariffs, accusations that the speech was a globalist-backed publicity operation. By post 14, 2 network anchors interrupted their own coverage to note live on air that the posts were accelerating in pace and degrading in coherence. By post 19, the final one before aides reportedly intervened, the president had contradicted his own trade team's position, misrepresented his own administration's economic data, and threatened new penalties that his own national security apparatus had not reviewed or approved. Each post was not a response to the embarrassment. Each post was an extension of it, broadcasting in real time the exact deficit in preparation and steadiness that Carney's speech had just finished demonstrating. Then came the press briefing. The press secretary approached the podium 40 minutes after the last post and attempted to reframe the speech as political theater with no substantive content. Reporters arrived with the exact figures Carney had cited, all sourced from American agencies, and they started asking questions. Is the 3.7% manufacturing job decline accurate? The press secretary did not know. Has the trade deficit with Canada grown by 11%? She would follow up. And then a reporter asked directly, does the administration have a comparable 36-month economic plan with targets and timelines? 6 seconds of silence. 6 seconds that were clipped, shared, and viewed more than 20 million times by the following morning. She did not answer. She moved to the next reporter, and those 6 seconds of silence became the clearest confirmation of Carney's point that any official White House statement could ever have provided. Within the 3rd hour, the internal fracture became public. 2 senior advisors, both speaking anonymously to journalists they trusted, both apparently unaware the other was talking, gave directly contradictory assessments to competing outlets within 20 minutes of each other. One told the Washington Post the administration was preparing a full policy response that would demonstrate the strength and coherence of the president's economic vision. The other told Politico that responding to Carney's figures at all would only elevate him, and that the speech did not deserve serious engagement. Both quotes appeared in print. Both were attributed to senior White House staff. Both were immediately placed side by every major newsroom in Washington, revealing an administration that could not agree internally on whether the crisis was real, whether to fight or ignore it, whether the damage was minor or severe. A senior State Department official, quoted in a separate outlet, put it plainly. We just watched a foreign leader deliver a more detailed economic strategy on live television than our own government has produced in 2 years. The silence on our side is not strategic. We simply have nothing comparable to show. That statement from inside the American government validated the central argument of Carney's speech more completely than anything Carney himself had said. The global response moved faster than the White House communications team could track. European diplomatic sources began using a specific phrase within hours, and it spread through international foreign policy circles with the speed of an idea that perfectly names something everyone has already observed: the composure gap. Not a partisan term, not a charged one, a clinical description of the measurable difference between a government that responds to pressure with facts, structure, and organizational steadiness, and a government that responds with online outbursts, contradictory statements, and visible internal disorder. France's foreign minister, in a closed session that leaked within hours, said, "We are no longer assessing the US-Canada relationship. We are assessing American institutional capacity. And what we observe today raises questions we cannot set aside." Germany's chancellor released a carefully worded public statement affirming the importance of evidence-based governance in international economic affairs, a statement that named no one and pointed at everything. Japan's trade ministry initiated a formal review of contingency protocols for scenarios involving unpredictable partner behavior, language every expert in Tokyo understood as a direct reference to the 3-hour breakdown. The rival assessment was more direct and more strategically alarming. A Beijing-based analyst quoted in the Financial Times framed it in terms that unsettled American defense planners. "We are not concerned about American strength. Strength can be measured and planned for. We are concerned about American predictability. If a 37-minute speech by a Canadian Prime Minister produces a 3-hour institutional breakdown, what happens under genuine geopolitical pressure? What happens in a crisis involving military assets, nuclear posture, or contested territorial claims? The composure gap is not a bilateral embarrassment. It is a global security variable. That framing, that American emotional stability had become a factor in rival strategic planning, was exactly the risk national security analysts had warned about for months. The breakdown had now made it undeniable and on the record. Warren Buffett addressed it without being asked directly about the speech. His observation, drawn from more than 7 decades of watching businesses and governments rise and collapse, was not about trade policy or bilateral relations or the specific details of what Carney said. It was about a principle he has applied to every major decision across his career. "In 70 years of business," he said, "I have watched strong plans fail and mediocre plans succeed. The single factor that predicts outcomes more reliably than any other is not the quality of the plan. It is the steadiness of the person executing it. Steadiness is not the absence of emotion. It is the discipline to follow preparation rather than impulse. And in any negotiation, any boardroom, any crisis, any contest between competing interests, the side that follows preparation wins. The side that follows impulse loses. I have never seen an exception to this rule." He connected it directly to what the world had just witnessed. One leader stood at the podium and delivered 37 minutes of sourced evidence. He did not raise his voice. He did not attack. He did not perform. He presented figures from his opponent's own government, verified by neutral institutions, alongside a forward plan with formal agreements and active implementation schedules. Then he asked one question. The response to that question was 19 social media posts, a press briefing unable to confirm its own government's numbers, and 2 senior advisors publicly contradicting each other on what the official position even was. The first was preparation. The second was impulse. The world, the partners, the rivals, the markets, the voters, all saw both simultaneously and reached a judgment. He went further on why public emotional responses to challenges are structurally self-defeating. When you respond emotionally to a public challenge, you send 3 signals at once. First, you signal that the challenge landed, that it penetrated your thinking and altered your behavior. Second, you signal that your judgment is now compromised, that decisions made in the hours that follow are driven by reaction rather than analysis. Third, and most critically, you signal that the person who challenged you now controls your conduct, because your actions are no longer guided by your own strategy, but by their provocation. I have sold profitable companies, well-run companies, companies with strong fundamentals, solely on the basis of how the CEO handled a difficult earnings call. Not the numbers, the steadiness. Because steadiness under pressure signals that the person has done the work, knows the material, trusts the plan, and can perform under scrutiny. The absence of steadiness signals the opposite. A CEO who unravels on an earnings call is telling you something the balance sheet does not show. The operational integrity beneath the numbers is compromised. What the White House communicated to the world through 3 hours of disorder and contradiction is exactly that signal. Sent publicly, sent irreversibly, seen by everyone. This is not a story about one speech or one bad afternoon. This is a story about what competence looks like when placed beside its absence, about what preparation looks like when placed beside improvisation, and about how the world, allies, rivals, markets, and voters read that contrast and remember it. The composure gap is now a phrase in diplomatic cables. It is a factor in rival strategic assessments. It is a term being used in closed foreign ministry sessions across 3 continents. One 37-minute speech did not cause a geopolitical shift, but it gave a name and a visible, documented, globally witnessed example to something that had been building for a long time. And no number of social media posts can unname it. We track this story every single day because the ripple effects are still moving, and each new development adds another layer to what you now understand. If you found this analysis valuable, share it with someone who needs to see the full picture. And if you want to stay ahead of how this unfolds, subscribing takes 2 seconds and means you will never miss an update.